Have you ever loved someone with all your heart, only to one day realize that to them, you are nothing more than a walking wallet, growing older by the day? My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I am 74 years old, and last Christmas I discovered a truth I will probably carry with me for the rest of my life. The 2 grandchildren I loved more than anyone else had secretly taken every dollar I had quietly saved over the years just to buy themselves a few pieces of tech. But the most painful part was not the missing money. It was how my family reacted when they found out. They chuckled. They said, "You're old. What do you even need money for?" They brushed off my hurt as if it was nothing. They thought I would stay silent like always. They thought I was weak. But this time, I did not stay silent. I did something that they will never forget. Before I tell you the full story, I want to ask, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever been dismissed by those you love, even after sacrificing everything for them? If your heart just twinged when you heard those questions, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, your city or country. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories of forgotten kindness, of elders being hurt, and the power of reclaiming dignity, then subscribe to this channel. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it is a wake-up call. That morning I woke up earlier than usual, outside snow-blanketed Maple Street, the street where I had lived for more than 40 years since I married Mr. Whitmore. The pale light of dawn filtered through the white lace curtains, casting soft shadows on the old wooden floor, a scene as peaceful and as unsettled as I felt inside. I rose from my bed, covered with a beige hand-embroidered wool blanket, wrapped myself in the lavender robe I had sewn 3 winters ago, and tied my silver hair into a neat bun. Every creaking step on the wooden stairs echoed a familiar sound. Every sound in the house carried a layer of memory, a layer of time. The kitchen was my favorite place in the entire house, the place where he used to read the newspaper while I baked, where past Christmases rang with children's laughter. The kitchen floor was laid with old checkerboard tiles, and the oak table handcrafted by my husband in his younger days. Everything remained just as it was back then, except now everything was silent. I turned on the stove to warm up the old coffee kettle from the 1970s, a keepsake I've treasured like a piece of my past. As the scent of coffee began to fill the room, I brought out flour, butter, and sugar and began making cinnamon rolls, the kind Sophie and Ben, my 2 grandchildren, used to adore. It was December 23rd. I had planned to bake ahead of time so that when the kids came over the next day, they would smell that familiar aroma and say, "Grandma, the rolls smell amazing, just like they used to." I wanted this Christmas to be warm again, to feel like the years when love and family meant everything in this house. As I baked, I quietly hummed Silent Night. My hands moved with the muscle memory of decades past. Every roll of the pin, every sprinkle of cinnamon and sugar brought back images of old Christmases. Sophie's eyes lighting up at the decorated tree, Ben running through the kitchen, begging me to let him lick the mixing spoon. I looked up at the wall above the sink, covered with family photos. One was of Mr. Whitmore and me in 1967, our wedding day, when I was a brand new teacher, and he shyly held my hand for the camera. Another was of my daughter Martha, as a little girl smiling brightly in a field of daisies. But the pictures that made my heart ache the most were of my 2 grandchildren. Sophie, 16 years old, a girl with bright brown eyes who once loved cats and books more than phones. And Ben, 14, a boy obsessed with airplane models who once told me, "Someday I'll be a pilot and fly you around the world." In one picture from the county fair 3 years ago, Sophie had her arm around Ben, both laughing with cotton candy all over their faces. I remember that day I took them to the fair, let them ride the Ferris wheel. From the top, all of Willow Creek looked small in their sparkling eyes. I placed my hand on the photo frame and my heart sank. I used to think that if I just loved enough, they would always love me back with the same full heart. But maybe love can be forgotten when people grow up in a fast-paced world filled with distractions. That afternoon, after cleaning up the kitchen, Filled with the scent of baked rolls, I decided to check on the money I had been saving all year. The money I had carefully stashed away from my pension government checks, and even skipped new clothes or a bus ride to the city just to save. I went upstairs. The bedroom looked the same as always, pillows neat, the small night lamp on the left side of the bed, and the old pendulum clock Mr. Whitmore used to dust every morning still hanging on the wall. I knelt down and quietly pulled out a faded silver tin box from under the bed. It was an old cookie tin I had kept since Sophie was a child. She had loved the picture of wildflowers on the lid. I opened the box, and in that moment, the world stopped. The box was empty. Not a single bill, not even a coin. Just the cold metallic bottom reflecting my face in the dim winter light. I froze. My hands trembled as I turned the box upside down, hoping against hope that maybe the money was stuck in a corner. But no, everything was gone. Clean, silent, cruel. I sank to the floor. The tin slipped from my fingers, rolled once and hit the dresser. My heart felt crushed. A flood of questions raced through my mind. Was I mistaken? Could I have hidden it elsewhere? But then, I remembered. I had checked this very box 2 weeks ago. It still held nearly $4,000. I had planned to use that money to buy Sophie a digital drawing pad and Ben the skateboard he had always dreamed of. I had imagined the joy on their faces when opening the gifts. I had smiled to myself, thinking that maybe, just maybe, they would finally see how much I still loved them. I sat there in silence, and then the memories returned. The weekend before Sophie and Ben had stopped by, they said they wanted to help decorate the tree. I was so thrilled to see them. After weeks of silence, I nearly cried. Sophie sat on the couch glued to her phone, while Ben rummaged through the kitchen looking for cookies. I was busy adjusting the string lights, even went down to the kitchen to make tea. I remembered Ben going upstairs for a bit. I thought he just wanted to look at Grandpa's old train set. I remembered Sophie asking to borrow my recipe book because she wanted to bake something for school. I handed it over, gladly, even gave her extra tips. Now that I think back, every detail fits, like puzzle pieces forming a picture I never wanted to see. I braced myself against the floor and stood up dizzy. The tin box lay there empty. The bed where I used to rock them to sleep now felt cold and distant. I walked to the nightstand, picked up the old landline phone. The numbers were blurry through my tears. I dialed Martha, my daughter, their mother. After 3 rings, Martha picked up. Her voice mixed with the background noise of TV and clattering pans. I did not waste time. Do you know who took the money from the box under my bed? There was a pause. Then Martha sighed. Mom. It was Sophie and Ben. They wanted to buy some stuff for Christmas. Sophie wanted Bluetooth headphones, and Ben has been dreaming about that new game. Please don't be mad. I figured you didn't really need that money, right? I was stunned. Don't make a big deal out of it. They're just kids. They'll understand when they're older. You'll save it all back anyway. Her voice was calm, almost indifferent, as if the $4,000 I had scraped together through lonely winters was just paper. I hung up the phone. My hands were not shaking from old age, but from heartbreak. I walked to the window. Snow still fell soft and silent, like the quiet inside this house. Across the street, Christmas lights twinkled on neighboring homes, but that light only made the emptiness inside me feel deeper. That night, I did not eat dinner. The chicken soup I had planned for myself still sat on the stove, the broth gone cold, the fat congealing into thin sheets like ice. I sat at the kitchen table in silence. This kitchen, once warm enough that even the clatter of dishes brought comfort, now felt colder than ever. I looked at the tin box on the table, now just evidence of a betrayed trust. There is something I never told anyone. I used to forgive childish mistakes. I believed that even selfish children could learn how to be kind if taught with love and patience. But this was not about money. It was about coldness. It was the way Sophie smirked, how Ben looked indifferent, and Martha brushed aside my pain as if I were just overreacting. I sat there late into the night, the kitchen lights still on. the scent of cinnamon still lingering on my sleeve. But to me, Christmas had died that afternoon. The next morning, I brewed a pot of ginger tea. I sipped it slowly, trying to soothe the fire in my chest. I looked at the two presents I had wrapped days earlier, one labeled Sophie, the other Ben. Bright red paper, golden ribbons, handwritten messages inside. I had smiled as I sealed each one, imagining their joy as they tore them open. But not anymore. I could not bring myself to hand those gifts to children who no longer valued love. I could not continue being the naive grandmother who forgave endlessly just to be loved. I placed my hand on the two presents. For the first time in many years, I asked myself, if kindness is not returned, with kindness should we keep giving it blindly? That was the moment something in me shifted. Not anger, not hatred, awakening. I knew I was no longer the weak woman they thought I was. I am Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I once taught hundreds of children how to write an essay, and more importantly, how to be a good person. And now perhaps it is time I teach my grandchildren a lesson, not with words, but with actions. I pulled out a chair, sat down at the table, and turned on the small lamp by the window. In front of me were the two gift boxes. I peeled off the name tags, gently, calmly, as if I were unpicking an old stitch from a worn-out coat. Sophie, Ben. Two names I had once written with shaky, loving hands. Now, I tucked them away in the drawer. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts. My finger stopped on a name, Miss Ellen, director of the Willow Creek Children's Center. A small place at the edge of town, a home for children with nowhere to go for Christmas. I had visited a few times before bringing cookies, scarves, and fairy tales. I hit call. The ringtone echoed. Then a warm voice answered. Hello, Miss Eleanor. How have you been? I took a deep breath. Miss Ellen, I have two Christmas gifts. One is a brand new digital drawing tablet, the other a beautiful skateboard. But I think my grandchildren do not deserve them. Do you think the kids at your center might need them? There was a pause. Then she said, her voice trembling, Oh, Miss Eleanor, the kids would be so thrilled. Those are the kinds of gifts we just do not have the budget for. Thank you. Thank you so much. I gave a soft smile, and I knew this was the beginning of something new. Not revenge, but a reminder to those who had forgotten love is not unconditional if it is trampled on too many times. The next morning, I got up before the sun rose. I brewed a pot of hot coffee, put on my ash-gray knit coat, and wrapped myself in the old red scarf Mr. Whitmore had given me for Christmas in 1985. Then I stood in front of the cabinet, looking at the two gifts neatly placed on the shelf, as if waiting for one final decision. No name tags, no more, to my dearest Sophie, or Grandma's love for Ben. Just two beautiful gifts waiting to be given to someone who would truly cherish them. I carefully placed them into a large fabric bag, zipped it up, and carried it to the car. My old cream-colored Ford, the one I had driven for more than a decade, started up after 2 turns of the key, just like always. I turned on the heater, took a deep breath, and drove away from the house where my heart had just closed a chapter. Willow Creek, during Christmas, was picturesque. Snow blanketed the rooftops and the bushes sparkled with a thin coat of frost. The townspeople were setting up the holiday market in the square strings of lights already twinkling. But I was in no mood to admire anything. My breath fogged up the window. My heart, however, was crystal clear. The Children's Center stood on the outskirts of town, a modest red brick building with a white picket fence and a wooden sign out front that read, Every child deserves a warm winter. I pulled up. Ellen, the center's director, was already waiting on the steps, holding a coffee cup and wearing her usual gentle smile. Miss Eleanor, you're up early, she said, her voice still holding that warm tone of someone who has worked with children their entire life. I handed her the gift bag. The children do not need to know who these are from, I said. But I have one request. Please have them write thank you letters signed by Sophie and Ben. Full last name, Whitmore. Ellen did not ask questions. She nodded. No judgment, No surprise, just understanding deep and genuine. I stepped inside. The smell of hot chocolate mixed with freshly unwrapped gift wrap. I could hear the clinking sounds coming from the crafts room where the children were making Christmas cards. A few of them ran past me, rosy cheeks, tiny hands in worn mittens, bright eyes looking at me with polite curiosity. I sat down on a fabric-covered chair by the window, gazing out at the small garden behind the center, where long wooden benches were now blanketed in snow. Ellen brought out 2 cups of ginger tea and sat beside me. "You know," she said quietly, "every year around this time, there are always a few kids who get nothing at all. But when they receive even the smallest gift and realize someone out there still remembers them, their eyes light up in the most magical way." I did not respond right away, but I understood. I had seen that light before many years ago, when I gave Sophie her first sketchbook, when I took Ben to buy his first pair of ice skates. I had thought those shining eyes would last forever, but sometimes love fades when people stop appreciating it. That light in their eyes used to stay with me, but now, perhaps, I will find it again in the faces of children who do not carry the Whitmore name. A little girl with curly brown hair ran up to me, looking at me with almond-shaped eyes. "Grandma, do you know how to bake cookies?" she asked. I laughed, a real laugh the first in days. I used to hold the record for finishing a whole tray of gingerbread cookies before the class even noticed. She burst into giggles, then pulled my hand into the small kitchen of the center. A group of kids was rolling dough flour smudged across their faces, looking at me as if a fairy godmother had stepped out of a storybook. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I still had something left to give. 2 days later, I returned to the Willow Creek Children's Center. Ellen had called me that morning, her voice brimming with excitement. "Miss Eleanor, tonight is our annual Christmas fundraiser. We're auctioning off some donated gifts. And guess what? The 2 you brought in will be featured as headline items." I paused for a moment on the phone. "Auctioned?" I asked. "Yes, there'll be families and donors from all over. Even the town station is coming to film. We'll publicly thank each donor by the name they requested." I smiled, a faint smile like the sound of dry leaves falling on a rooftop. That evening, I wore a deep brown sweater and pinned a Christmas tree brooch to my chest, the last birthday gift Mr. Whitmore ever gave me before he passed. I entered the small hall at the community center where the auction was being held. The room was warm, decorated with paper snowflakes, string lights, and wreaths. Children laughed, adults shook hands, an air full of festive spirit. I sat quietly in the last row. No one recognized me. That was fine. I was not there to be applauded. I was there to witness something I hoped Sophie and Ben would never forget. The auction began with smaller items, handmade scarves, a landscape painting, a box of fancy cookies. Then came the digital drawing pad and the skateboard. The announcer held the gifts up high, the spotlight shining directly onto the red wrapping paper I had once lovingly folded. He spoke clearly. These special gifts were donated by 2 children, Sophie and Ben Whitmore. They chose not to keep them, but instead to give them to children less fortunate. On behalf of all the kids here, we thank Sophie and Ben for their generous hearts. The hall erupted into applause. I sat still, eyes fixed on the light. I could imagine Sophie's face flushed with confusion, or Ben biting his lip, wondering why their names were being said out loud like that. Because the night before, Ellen had told me that a thank you letter had been sent to Martha's house, Sophie and Ben's mother. A carefully handwritten note on Willow Creek Center's letterhead, stamped with a festive seal. It read, "On behalf of the children at Willow Creek Center, we sincerely thank Sophie and Ben Whitmore for their meaningful contribution this holiday season. Thanks to their generosity, we were able to raise enough funds to buy warm clothing and toys for orphaned children. We wish you both a joyful and heartwarming Christmas." Signed, Ellen Murray, Director. I did not need to imagine more. I knew with certainty that when Martha opened that letter, and when Sophie and Ben read each line, their hearts, no matter how hardened, would be moved, even just a little. Not because of guilt, but because of surprise. because for the first time in their lives they were praised for something they had not actually done. And from that, they would have to ask themselves, do I really deserve this thanks? I quietly left the hall while the cameras still flashed. On the way home, I did not turn on the radio like I usually did. I let the car glide slowly over snow-covered roads, my heart quiet in a way it had not been for weeks. Not joyful, not vindicated, just lighter. The next afternoon, as I was trimming dry pine branches to remake my door wreath, the landline phone in the living room rang loud and insistent. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone. I did not need to ask who it was. As expected, it was Martha. Her voice was tight dry, without the usual greetings. Did you send something to the children's center? I was silent for a few seconds, then replied calmly, I sent 2 gifts, on behalf of Sophie and Ben. I heard Martha's breathing quicken. Footsteps, then a door slammed. She had probably left the living room not wanting her husband or children to overhear what was coming. Mother, do you know how confused the kids were by that letter? What will their friends think if they see their names in the town paper? Now everyone thinks my children are little charity angels when they didn't do a thing. I kept my tone even, exactly. Because they did not do a thing, I did it for them, so they could feel what it is like to receive gratitude they did not earn. Sometimes being placed in the shoes of the good makes you take a long, hard look at yourself. Silence. A long pause that lasted nearly half a minute. Then Martha's voice softened. No longer sharp, Mum. I know you're hurt. I know what they did was wrong, but did you really have to take it this far? I was going to talk to them, but now they're just upset. Sophie cried. She said you humiliated her in front of her whole school. I chuckled, not mockingly, but like someone who had heard the same excuse decades ago as a young mother herself. How strange, my dear. When I speak the truth, they call it humiliation. But when others do wrong, they expect me to stay silent to protect their pride. Martha said nothing. I took a slow, deep breath, then said steadily, I did not do this to shame anyone. I did it because I needed to remind myself and those I love that kindness should never be assumed. It must be protected. It must be reciprocated, not treated as weakness to be exploited. On the other end, Martha's voice turned hoarse. Do you know what the kids said? I waited. They asked, if Grandma doesn't need the money, then why is she so mad? I looked up at the chandelier Mr. Whitmore had hung so many decades ago. My voice was gentle but firm. I'm not upset about the money. I'm upset about the love. I'm upset about all the afternoons I waited for a message, about the eyes that once sparkled with affection, now filled with indifference. I'm upset because I realized I had poured so much love into a place that no longer valued it. I heard Martha sigh, not in anger, not in defense, just a heavy, sorrowful exhale, as if something cracked inside her that she had tried to hold in for too long. Mom, Sophie and Ben, they might not get it yet, but I do now, I said softly. Then teach them that family is precious, but not free. It is nurtured with care and gratitude, not taken for granted and brushed aside. Martha did not say another word, just a quiet yes caught in her throat. I hung up, gently, as if folding a letter I had finished reading. Outside the wind blew cold, but inside me, I was no longer cold. 3 days after the phone call with Martha, on the morning of December 27th, I was tidying up the living room when the doorbell rang. I did not rush to answer. I recognized that kind of doorbell ring, not from the mailman or a neighbor. It was a hesitant press, the kind someone gives when they are unsure they should even be there. I walked over, wiped my hands on my apron, and opened the door. Sophie stood there. She wore her familiar grey hoodie, hands buried deep in her pockets. Next to her was Ben, his face thinner than before, hair messy like he had just taken off a wool hat. Behind them stood Martha, holding a paper bag, perhaps filled with cookies or flowers, some sort of polite peace offering. I said nothing. I just opened the door wider and tilted my head slightly. They stepped inside. The living room was warm like always. The scent of wood chamomile tea and memories hung in the air. Sophie and Ben sat quietly on the sofa. Martha placed the bag on the table but did not sit. I poured 3 cups of tea, set them on the table. No snacks, no polite invitations, just silence, like thin ice just before it starts to melt. After a while, Ben was the first to speak. "Grandma, are you really mad at me?" I looked straight into his eyes I had once seen sparkling when he was a 7-year-old boy running through the yard with a paper airplane. "I am not mad. I am disappointed." Ben lowered his head. Then Sophie spoke, her voice trembling. "I did not think you would find out so fast. I thought it was just money." I nodded gently. "Yes, just money. But the real question is, why when you needed it, did you not ask? Why choose to sneak it when I was right here?" Silence. Then Sophie bit her lip. I was ashamed. I knew it was wrong. But at that moment, I thought you were old. "You probably did not need it." I set down my teacup, my palm resting against the warm ceramic. That is what hurt the most. Not the action, but the way you saw me as someone without value. Ben looked up, eyes watery. I did not want you to feel that way. It is just, we honestly did not know what you needed. We thought you were doing fine. I sat up straighter, my voice slow and steady. "I do not need money. I need you. I need a hug, a message now and then. I need to feel like I still exist in your world." Martha stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sophie looked at me, her eyes shimmering. "Grandma, did you really send our gifts to the Children's Center?" I nodded. "Yes." And the children there were beaming with joy. They wrote a thank you letter, but the names signed were yours. Ben looked up. I read the letter. At first, I was angry. Then, I felt ashamed. I did not blame them. I only said quietly, "Sometimes the best way to learn a lesson is to stand in the light even when you are not ready, because light does not just expose mistakes, it shows us what we need to fix." By now, Martha had sat down. Her eyes were red. "We're sorry, Mom. Truly." I did not respond with words. I reached out and placed my wrinkled hand gently over Sophie's. My hand was old-tired, but in that moment, the warmth passed through as if stitching something back together that had once torn. The air was still heavy, but not cold anymore. I stood and walked into the kitchen. "Stay for lunch. I made meatball soup, Sophie's favorite. And Ben, I still have some of your old airplane models up in the attic." The two looked at each other, then nodded. Slowly, but sincerely. My kitchen had not felt that warm in years. The smell of tomato broth filled the air. Steam fogged up the windows, catching the soft afternoon light streaming through the pine trees outside. I stood at the stove, gently stirring with a wooden ladle. Behind me, Sophie's footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. She stopped just behind me. Unsure, then quietly asked, "Grandma, is there anything I can help with?" I turned to her. Her expression was different, not distant or defensive, but open, honest. A girl trying to earn back what she had lost. I handed her the knife and a bunch of onions. "Slice them thin. Be careful with your fingers." She nodded. No complaints. No eye rolls. Just stood beside me slicing onions with hands more used to holding a phone than a knife. Behind us, Ben rummaged through the old toy drawer. He pulled out a wooden box filled with his old airplane models, dusty but intact. "Grandma," he called out, "these are still here. I thought you'd thrown them away." I did not turn around, but I smiled. I don't throw away things that matter, even if others think they have lost their value. Ben fell silent for a second. Then he murmured, "Like how you didn't throw us away." I said nothing, but something inside me melted light as morning frost disappearing at first sun. We had lunch in near silence, but it was the good kind, no longer strained. Sophie finished her soup, even asked for seconds. Ben told stories about school arguments with friends. Little things that might seem meaningless, but to me they were more precious than any gift under a tree. After the meal, once everything had been cleared, I stood by the living room window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. Martha came up beside me, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Did you know? We were planning to buy you a Christmas gift." I turned to her silent. "We were going to get you an e-reader. You love to read and your eyesight's not so great anymore. But after everything happened, we were too ashamed to bring it." I sighed a long, slow exhale. The most meaningful gift to me does not come in a box. It lives in the heart. Martha nodded slowly. "I understand that now. Truly." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then live like you do. That's all." A little later, as the sky dimmed, Sophie and Ben put on their coats to leave. Just before stepping out the door, Sophie turned around and gave me a long, tight hug, the first in a very, very long time. "Grandma, next Christmas will come again, but not just for the gifts." I gently squeezed her shoulders. "This time I believe you." And as the door closed behind them, I returned to my room, lit another cinnamon-scented candle, and settled into my old armchair. In that little house I had grown a year older, but in my heart, I had grown a few years younger. Not because everything was healed, but because I was no longer alone in my healing. A week later, the town of Willow Creek welcomed the new year. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of dark earth beneath the white picket fence outside my house. The pine tree by my porch still had its string lights, but I left them off. I wanted to hold on to the quiet that follows a storm, the kind of quiet I had earned through a pain I never thought I would survive. That afternoon, I sat at my old wooden table, holding my worn leather notebook, the one where I wrote down life's little truths. On the first page in delicate handwriting, I had once written, "All good things begin with honesty." I flipped to a fresh page, and I began to write, "Today, I forgave." Not because they apologized the right way, but because I chose peace over resentment. I kept my kindness through what felt like the coldest winter of my life. I set the pen down, taking a long breath. Outside, the rare winter sunlight cast a soft glow across the floor. It was not enough to warm the room, but it was enough to show the dust resting on the wood. And I realized it did not make the house any less beautiful. It only reminded me time had passed here. Later that day, I heard a car pull up outside. I peeked through the window. It was Sophie. She stood alone, holding a small picture frame. When I opened the door, she held it out, a hand-drawn portrait of me. Not a realistic sketch, but one filled with color, warmth, and a charming messiness. There was snow on my hair, a smile on my lips, and in the bottom corner, a small handwritten line, "To the grandma who taught me how to give when no one else did." I said nothing. I just pulled her into a hug. This time I cried, but not from sadness, because I knew I had won. Not against anyone, but against myself, because I did not give up on kindness even when I wanted to. And perhaps that was the best Christmas gift I ever received, albeit a little late. I am 74 years old. I have lived long enough to know people can lose money, trust, even love. But if you still have a heart that knows how to give, you are never truly old. And if you are still listening now, I hope you remember this. It is never too late to teach someone how to love again through proud silence and kindness that refuses to break. If this story touched something in your heart, please comment your city or country below, and do not forget to subscribe so I can share more stories like this. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. We will meet again in honest, warm, and timeless tales.